Hi guys, welcome to day 7 of your poetry unit. Today you've already taken some notes on a poetry strategy for analyzing poetry called TP-CASTT. And of course that's an acronym where every letter in the title stands for something else. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how you can use TP-CASTT to walk through a poem and really think about it further than just what your first impression might be. So today what you're going to be reading a poem called My Mother Pieced Quilts, and it's in your literature textbook on page 478. And there's a place in your poetry packet to take notes on the poem itself. There's also a little bit of information about quilting as an art form, and it's in your poetry packet as well to help you better understand this particular poem. So we start, before we even read the poem, we start with our first letter of our acronym TP-CASTT, and that's the letter T, which stands for title. So the poem's title is My Mother Pieced Quilts. So your first thoughts might be, okay, this is a poem about a mother. This is a poem about quilting or sewing. This is a poem about putting pieces together. You might think of a puzzle. Anything that you first think of, your first impression, before you actually even read the poem. That's what your first T is for. So then we're going to actually read the poem, and we're going to go back and walk through the other letters. This is the poem you might read and go, I have no idea what they're talking about because I don't know much about quilting. So where TP-CASTT can really come in handy. So we are moving on to P, paraphrase. Now technically with paraphrase you would want to kind of break through and rewrite the poem, what it says, just in your own words without interpreting. Well, instead of doing that, we're just going to start with line 20 and look at paraphrasing that particular stanza. So it says, how the thread darted in and out, galloping along the frayed edges, tucking them in as you did as at night. So you might say, the speaker is comparing the thread work or the sewing work to the way that the mother tucked them in at night. So I was comparing her handcraft or art to her mothering nature. How you stretched and turned and rearranged your Michigan spring faded curtains, my father's Santa Fe work shirt, the summer denims, the tweeds of fall. So, in other words, how the mother rearranged the different pieces of their clothing and fabrics from their house to create something new. So that's just a way of paraphrasing it, because a lot of times poetry is written, it's not necessarily in sentence structure or order, as you notice with this poem, especially when you have hardly any punctuation at all, and then no complete sentences formed. So that just kind of might help you to understand what she's actually saying. Because the next thing you do is the C, which is connotation, and that's when you do some interpreting. So why don't we look at the second page of the poem, which is line 38. You were the river current, carrying the roaring notes, forming them into pictures of a little boy reclining, a swallow flying. These particular lines are not meaning what they're saying, right? There's figurative language used that you have to interpret to really understand what the poet is trying to say. And so when she says you were the river current carrying the roaring notes, it's she's making the comparison, a metaphor, saying that you were the driving force of this art. You were the driving force of these pictures. When she says, you were the caravan master at the reins, driving your threaded needle artillery across the mosaic cloth bridges, delivering yourself in separate testimonies. Now here, it's the same idea, the caravan master at the reins. You were, again, it's the same idea, that driving force, the one who kept everything together, who was the leader, the one in charge. So you kind of use the figurative language and break it down with connotation and figure out what the poet is actually saying with the different metaphors, similes, personification, etc. Then we move on to the next letter, which is A. It stands for attitude. When we're talking about attitude, we're really talking about the tone of the speaker towards the subject of the poem. Well, our speaker is writing about her mother, or I should say his or her mother. Of course, I'm assuming it's a female. And we definitely get this attitude that there's a sense of respect and appreciation and love for the mother and for that art form that she used to create and show her love. And I think that you could find several spots throughout, you know, again, going back to the connotation, you being the river current, you being the caravan master, you know, how you shaped and how you formed, and it's a sense of awe and respect and admiration for the mother's, not only for her craft, for her art, but for what it represented to the family, which of course leads us to the next letter in TP-CASTT, which is S for symbol. And of course symbol means when you have something that represents something else. Well, in this poem, really the quilts themselves are symbolic. If you look on lines like 10 through 12, the strips of gentle communion, cotton and flannel nightgowns, wedding organdies, dime store velvets. The quilt itself is not just pieces of fabric, but rather representative of the family's history. The communion cotton, that might be a dress that was worn for a first communion. Flannel nightgowns might be, you know, things that they wore on Christmas Eve. Wedding organdies, wedding dresses, you know, all these little pieces of the family's history told through the fabrics. So the quilt's more than just a piece together fabric, it's also a history of the family. And that same idea is carried out at the very end of the poem, saying, there they lay, armed, ready, shouting, celebrating, knotted with love, the quilts sing on. Well, obviously the quilts aren't singing, but it is symbolic of the idea that the quilts carry that family's heritage into the future, that idea that the history is carried out over the course of time because of this kind of sense of history, which if you read into the background of quilts, that's kind of part of the art form, is that they told a story, they told history by piecing together these fabrics in certain ways that really created a sense of storytelling. So we've got TP-CASTT, so we go back to T. We'll look at T, this time we're looking at the title again. My Mother Pieced Quilts. Now, do you have any kind of new understanding for the title now that you've read the poem? So you might think, why did she name it My Mother Pieced Quilts rather than My Mother Sewed Quilts? And it might, you know, it might make you understand that piecing together was kind of the mother's being the puzzle maker that kept the family together, the connecting force, the driving force of that family story. Or, you know, you might think of something else, but so a lot of times revisiting the title after you've read the poem might give you a new understanding for why the poet decided to title the poem that way. Which brings us to our last T, which is theme. Theme, of course, being the message of the poem or the lesson. I think for this poem you could say that the theme might be that in this family the mother is the thread, like the thread of the quilt, the mother is the thread that binds the family together. By being that recorder of history through her art form and kind of harnessing the respect of her family. Or that you might say, you know, the theme is families might have history that is created through the different stories, the different artifacts that bring that family's life together. But again, that theme is that message, that moral that is told throughout the story. In this case, poems don't always tell stories, but a lot of times they do have themes or messages that they're trying to send. So this is a particular strategy. It can be really useful when you're trying to break down a poem, especially a poem that you don't get right away, is to really go back and break it down and think about, okay, what does the poem actually say? Now, what do they mean? Now, what are they trying to, you know, what's the message? What's the attitude? What's the approach to this topic that they're taking? So you are going to have a chance to practice this strategy on some poems of yourself. I will see you next class. Y'all work hard today.